whenever there's been a technological revolution, there's been more jobs. There is always the chance that this time is different, but I don't think that will be the case. I think instead of if engineering becomes 10 times easier, I don't think you'll get 1/10 of the engineers. I think you'll get 10 times more code. And whenever you talk to someone running a business, there's always things you want to do. And the limiting factor is usually just time. So I think you'll just have smaller organizations that can get a lot more done versus people losing their jobs or getting fully replaced by the AI. And again, that kind of harkens back to you can never go wrong with learning how to use the new technology, because then you're much harder to replace in that way. But there might be some shifts, there might be some changes in terms of the larger companies, and it's unsure what that will be. But generally optimistic, I think it will lead to a better livelihood for most, if not all, the people on the planet.
PromptHub. That's an interesting name. I've got two connotations. What is it?
Yeah, we want to be associated with the correct one, so I'm happy to give some background. Essentially, the GitHub for prompts, just to set that straight from the start. And yeah, PromptHub.us if you want to check it out. But basically, we were running a separate company before this, like a bug reporting tool, and ChatGPT comes out, and everyone else, we rushed to build a bunch of LLM features into our bug reporting SaaS application at the time. And we jumped on this pretty quickly as a startup just because we saw we actually had been playing around with the models before ChatGPT, like in the summer of 2020, I think was like when the first like kind of models that you could use came out. You could email Greg Brockman to get early access, but then ChatGPT comes out, the models are much better. We tried to build stuff into our old bug reporting tool and basically ran into a lot of issues around versioning management and collaboration. And it was a very new space. There weren't a lot of tools out there at the time. And what we also saw was like a lot of the tooling out there was really geared towards ML tooling. So level 5 ML engineer versus a software engineer, or even just like a product manager. Because we tried some of the other tools out and it was just hard for me to use as like more of a PM type role and collaborate with my CTO and other engineers. And that was really where the genesis came from. And we wanted an easy to use tool for everyone. But we also saw looking forward, the versioning, the management, the community aspect that could be built around prompts in the same way that it was done with code. And so, yeah, that's generally how we started. It's been just about 2 years now, or a little bit more than 2 years, which is pretty crazy because the time has really flown by and so much has happened and developed in those 2 years too.
Okay, so 2 questions right away. First of all, why do we need a PromptHub instead of just putting that on GitHub, like all the other code that we produce? And second of all, to state the obvious, all the non-deterministic nature of all these prompts, how much value do you really get from copying these prompts?
Yeah, so we also started with our prompts in code initially when we were working on the previous company before this. And you really want to decouple your prompts from your code for a number of reasons, but one of them being you will work on the prompts in your code at different velocities. I might spend like a day tweaking and iterating on prompts, and I want to be able to update that automatically, push out the system without having to either deploy new code or to bug my engineers to change things. So it's an empowering also of folks who maybe aren't software engineers, but who are very important to the prompt engineering process, like subject matter experts. And also your code lives in GitHub. GitHub is built for code. So there's not a lot of like prompt testing, all this other stuff where you'd want everything integrated from creating the prompt, testing it, doing different models, and then pushing it to different environments. So you want to be able to have those separate so you can move at the speeds that you want to. And in terms of the non-deterministic nature of these, like how helpful is it to take a prompt that I've written and then go use it if it's not going to be the same output every time? I think there's a lot of insights you can draw from seeing other people's prompts, whether that's people on your team, people in our community. We just published a whole collection of Copilot prompts in our partnership with GitHub. So it's interesting to see how like teams at GitHub are actually like writing prompts for the tools that they're building. And so while you can't be 100% certain of the output all the time, it gives you a good inspiration or a starting point that you could then go and say, okay, here's this interesting prompt for a coding agent from a tool like Bolt. I could take this, fork it, try it out, maybe tweak some things that could be helpful for whatever my use case is.
So it's maybe a little bit less source control and more discovery and Wikipedia of prompts so that you can get inspired?
I think it's a combo of both in the same way that you can find like repositories in GitHub. You can discover them and then you can fork them and then commit and maintain. You have a version history for that repository dating back to the original discovery. It's the same thing where you can discover through the community and then you can make it your own. So you can add it to your library of prompts. You can tweak it, remove certain things, keep certain things, commit new changes, and take it from there. So the community is just like a starting point that you have that you can leverage if you want to.
Got it. So to change the subject a little bit, historians some years from now are going to have an interesting puzzle to solve when they see how many gurus on LinkedIn pivoted or flocked from crypto to being AI experts all of a sudden. And the recurring theme of that was that, look at my prompts. I've got the best prompts. Here's my list of prompts. Maybe go pay me money for this prompt. How do these prompts evolve? Should you be practicing your prompting outside of specific applications in general? Is that like a skill you should have on your CV? What's your take on that?
I think it surprisingly is. And I think the best thing you could do just in general is to use the models as much as you can. And technically every time you're using a model, you're setting a prompt, even if it doesn't feel like prompt engineering. The more just better understanding of how these models work, that better understanding that you have, the more valuable you are and like will be able to get more done generally, whether it's like in a vibe coding app or in ChatGPT or elsewhere. The more you use these things, the better you are at using them. And so I think that's important. The whole like, here's 20 marketing prompts again is I think helpful for like inspiration. And I think it can show you different ways that you can potentially use the models that you haven't thought of before, which can always be helpful. But then the really like where prompt engineering is actually very important is when you are using LLMs in your own product, when you are shipping these things to your users and you need it to be a great experience, you need it to be as reliable as it can or should be. And small changes end up making a huge difference, let alone swapping in different models for different situations. So that's when it like really is a skill, I would say. And people pay high salaries for people who are good at that. And it will continue to be something that's important as a skill, maybe not so much as a standalone job title, but a very important skill for product managers, engineers, anyone working on implementing AI into their products.
What's your take on we're going to all get jobless soon because it's all going to be vibe engineering going forward?
Yeah, I like to take the approach of whenever there's been a technological revolution, there's been more jobs. There is always the chance that this time is different, but I don't think that will be the case. I think instead of if engineering becomes 10 times easier, I don't think you'll get 1/10 of the engineers. I think you'll get 10 times more code. And whenever you talk to someone running a business, there's always things you want to do. And the limiting factor is usually just time. So I think you'll just have smaller organizations that can get a lot more done versus people losing their jobs or getting fully replaced by the AI. And again, that kind of harkens back to you can never go wrong with learning how to use the new technology because then you're much harder to replace in that way. But there might be some shifts, there might be some changes in terms of the larger companies, and it's unsure what that will be. But generally optimistic, I think it will lead to a better livelihood for most, if not all, the people on the planet.
I'm assuming you are familiar with that meme where you've got the Terminators walking around and one is telling the other one, not this human. He was always nice to us. He always said thank you. How much of the prompting today is still like black magic, as in if you put thank you and please in all caps at the end, it will more likely do what you asked it to do?
Yeah, I hope that meme ends up being true, because if that's the case, I should be in like a really good spot since I've been trying to help people use the thing and get more people to use it. We're still definitely figuring out what works. And we published a blog about a research paper that's did like a whole study of being very polite to being very rude. And the answer was to be like a little polite, but not like overly like flowery, which like you could say mimics human interaction. You could feel when someone's being a little fake, like overzealous, and whatever. Maybe that's a little too far of an anthropomorphication, but generally we're finding out what works. You saw chain of thought go from what was like a fringe prompt engineering kind of method to be a huge boon in terms of LLM performance. And now every model provider is baking that in to inference time. And so you never know what will be the next version of that. Will it come from the prompt engineering world or not? But we're learning more every day. I think what you will see over time is maybe some of these like what could be deemed or seen as more like tricks, the bribing, the threats. I think that goes away, but the ability to write clear, crisp instructions to actually take what's in your head and put it into a prompt onto paper is always going to be a challenge, because it's really challenging to articulate all that context that's in your head, get it onto a prompt, and to then scale that. And so that will always be there because it's inseparable from like the underlying interaction. It's not just like writing the instructions, it's writing the instructions, giving the proper context, and handling like situations in a way that's like correct and follows what you want to do. So that will never go away. These tricks and stuff, some of that has already gone away. And I think less so of that in the future too, as the models get smarter.
It's hard enough to articulate in a way that another human being understands you. Why would it be easier with a machine?
Exactly. Yeah.
How has prompting evolved over the time that you've been actively working on it? Has it become easier to do? Has it become harder?
I think there's that little bit of, oh, there's going to be some like less tricks you need to do or something like that. I think it's basically as hard as it was before because of what you just mentioned, where if I hired an intern today or even like a coworker or someone that was smarter than me, in order for them to know how to do a certain thing, there's a lot of like internal context that I have as like the business owner or like the department owner that isn't necessarily related to the fact that they have a PhD level in mathematics. I need to teach them how to handle like certain customer support tickets. That was challenging 2 years ago. It's probably easier now, but you hit some kind of threshold of intelligence where like an incremental point of intelligence isn't really going to help with that. It's always hard to be concise and clear with your instructions. And so in that way, it's always been the same level of difficulty, but the model's getting smarter definitely has decreased that to a degree, I'd say.
What about portability? How much can you reuse between models?
It's a great area of study. We go pretty deep into it. We're always trying to keep up with the latest research around these things. And what's interesting is with the latest Claude 4 models and then the GPT 4.1 models was the first time that with the model release, there was prompt engineering guidance specifically for those models. They were trained to follow instructions much more literally and were less able to make assumptions or presumptions about like your task. And so there's migration guides for these things from, hey, if you were using 4.0 before, here's how like you should change it to be 4.1. If you're using 3.5 Sonnet, here's how you should do it for 4 Sonnet. And so there definitely is a difference, so much so that these model providers are giving explicit instruction. And that's where it's hard to know exactly. Like they'll say, make sure they're more clear and more precise and give more explicit details. But that can be hard to grok as like a rule. And so I think that's where a platform like ours, and there's others, but just the ability to have a set of tests that you run and see how the different models perform with the same prompt, I think is hugely helpful, just even for an understanding, but certainly if you're shipping these models to production.
What would be some of the best use cases for prompting? When is it at its easiest and most demo worthy? Is it coding maybe? Is it at the particular domain?
I think it becomes the most valuable when you are like deep in whatever use case that you are close to. So if you're inside the team that's been working on a coding agent, being able to see someone to take your eval scores from 80 to 90 is like hugely valuable. And I think that's where it can like really shine. And it's usually like a different approach to the prompt in general, reframing it, rethinking about things, trying different things out. The raw intelligence of the models is such that it can be used just like a vibe code building kind of application. Like you could just type something in, you'll get something really good out on the other side. And that's pretty interesting, but it's not so much an engineering problem. It's like more of showing the prowess of the models. But when you're knee deep working in a team, trying to get the eval score up, and you see someone who could get that extra 10%, that extra 5%, that's much more of an engineering type feat at that point.
Yeah.
And it's usually something that they've done interesting to figure out how to do that.
Okay, fair enough. Where do you see it going? How are we going to be prompting models a year or two from now?
I think back to like early ChatGPT where people said it's done in 6 months, it's done in a year, and it's still here. It's still very important. And arguably, it's much more important. You can make the argument, we all have the same models, right? So what we do around the models in terms of UX, in terms of like things along those lines is really where you can create these really amazing experiences. And so there's always going to be like a delta that teams can get by having an edge in prompt engineering. So I don't think that's going away. I think, more broadly, how we interact with these models, more and more voice stuff popping up. I use voice a lot more now. It's just a lot better and a lot faster than typing. And so in terms of that modality, I think will continue to be really important. We'll get better speech to text to speech, and speech to speech models.
With the notable exception of actually typing code.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think we're going to be pretty similar. I think there's going to be much more companies like ours and around infrastructure tooling around prompt engineering requests and things like that. I think you'll see that continue to build out, and this will become more and more formalized.
Is everybody in the world a programmer now? Like a certain black leather jacket wearing NVIDIA C claimed not that long ago?
depends on how we define programmer. Where we currently are, all the vibe coding tools are really powerful, but they all suffer from the same issue of the last 10% being almost impossible for someone who's not ever written a line of code in their life. And it will be great when it gets to the point where that's not the case. But there's something I think important in terms of not only building a great product and like being an engineer is much more than the code that you write. And so just because someone can generate all the code for something and it can even work doesn't necessarily make them an engineer, I would say. I think an engineer's mindset is very important. I think the taste of an engineer is very important. And there's some stuff that are like separated from just the code itself that is important. And not to mention that, the vibe coded products are like 5 to 10% away, but they're amazing. We use them all the time. I use them all the time for like prototyping and things along those lines, and they'll continue to get better.
Yeah, the last 10% is difficult. They work great for demos though. You
Yeah,
want to
exactly.
generate another to-do app or 3.js, a little funny game,
Yeah.
that will work great.
Yeah, exactly.
What does everybody get wrong about prompt engineering?
If you're just writing in ChatGPT, like you would probably think, oh, why are these people spending so much time talking about prompt engineering? I can just tell ChatGPT to write me some marketing posts and then it's good to go. And that's definitely true, right? It's definitely dependent on the use case. And I think it's really important for the people who are building actual applications that use these models and serve them to users in production. And so if you've ever talked to somebody who's like really needed to like have something work in production, it's funny. They know how hard this stuff is versus if you talk to someone who's never had to do that, they think it's silly. And so I think that divide shows where prompt engineering is actually like really important. That's for app developers.
Yeah. For me, the time that I think about prompt engineering the most is probably when I go through my LinkedIn as 80% AI generated comments that kind of summarize what I just said,
Yeah.
say it a little bit differently, and ask a question for me to engage with.
Yeah. Yep. That seems to be the formula.
Yes, this is crazy. Imagine all the GPUs burning all that electricity so that they can spam more CPUs on the LinkedIn side.
It's a virtuous cycle.
Okay. What are some of the breakthroughs that you're really looking forward to and you think we're getting close to in LLMs or maybe in AI more broadly?
I think what was really cool for me to see was the like reasoning models. And I know that's like looking back a little bit, but it really was just like a translation of something that was more or less like the pioneering thing in prompt engineering. And then that being baked into the models, I think was a really important moment. It was really cool to see that we just learned from people using the models a lot, finding different use cases, then that could be built actually into how we interact with the models. It was a really cool moment. I think looking forward, obviously agents is the big one, and the reasoning helps with that. Long-term planning helps with that. Tools helps with that. We're working on some like MCP related stuff, which is really interesting. So MCP is the Model Context Protocol, and it's a protocol set up or created by Anthropic to essentially make it easier for AI applications to talk to other services. Get me all the repos I have that are public, send me a Slack message, something along those lines. And it just standardizes that communication so you don't have to build a different like communication with each of the models or choose each service. You can just reuse, or you can just use this protocol that has things set up. And so it's very promising for app developers because it makes a lot of things easier to stand up quickly. And it's being adopted. You always have the nth protocol problem, but luckily this seems to be getting picked up by OpenAI and Google, and of course Anthropic as well. So if it can stick, that's huge. I mean, if we all adopt it, that's great. And it allows for people to build things a lot more quickly and make much more powerful experiences in a more richer ecosystem in general. So we're really excited for that.
And for anybody just played with ChatGPT, didn't really think about prompts a lot, and would like to really understand like the power of prompt engineering in general, where should they go? How should they start?
I would check out our blog. We write out a lot about this stuff, and then you can pick and choose whatever kind of relates to you. And then a really powerful thing I think is just to test different models side by side. And you could do that in PromptHub, or you could do that with different windows and just see how like little changes are different, how the models handle things differently. I mean, you could start to see the kind of where certain models maybe work better for you or not. But again, I think there's nothing that really replaces just using these things a lot in whatever tooling or way that is comfortable for you. You're finding little tricks and tips that you can even just use in your daily kind of ChatGPT type life.
Live events, perhaps, you'd like to recommend?
Well, yeah, we do have one. So coming up in London with Miko and his brother Mark, we're throwing our first in-person prompt engineering conference event. So we had the first prompt engineering conference online back in 2023 with my co-organizers, Maxime from Microsoft and Goda, who's very popular on YouTube. And we're super happy to be doing it in person this upcoming October in London. It's going to be a ton of fun. We'll have a bunch of info about that up pretty soon. It's going to be a blast. We're really looking forward to it.
Pleasure talking to you.
You as
See you
well,
next
Miko.
time.
See ya.